Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I am so pleased that today we have Jen Donohue on to talk about her debut novel, Exit Ghost, with us.
Hello, it's me.
Yay! You finally made it.
Yes. Ever since I heard of you guys, and then, we're mutuals like everywhere. I'm like, be on the podcast. I've been telling people all day. I'm like, I have to go home and go on a podcast afterwards. Oh.
Oh, I have I'll say like, oh, I have an interview today. And then my friends will go, you're being interviewed? And I'm like, oh, no. No, the opposite.
I told one of my coworkers earlier this week, I was like, oh, and I'm being interviewed on Saturday. And she got really quiet and she was like, a job interview? And I was like, no, I'm not leaving you for my other career.
Yeah. I think we also have the delight of being joined by extra dogs on this recording. So we have, of course, Sarah's two pugs. And then what is your Doberman's name, Jen?
Her full name is Ulrika, and we call her Rika most of the time, or variations on that name.
Wonderful.
I have definitely been mentally mispronouncing her name this entire time.
That's fine because it's pronounced like if you spelled Ulrich, if you look at it, that's like
That is how I've been pronouncing it.
the German pronunciation. Yeah, which is fine. My husband has named both of our dogs, which we have had serially, not congruently. And they're a German breed. So we look for like a German name, and he's good at names. He's maddeningly good at names.
And of course, naming is one of the hardest parts when you're coming up with characters.
It's very hard. Many brackets are in my rough drafts.
Well, before we get ahead of ourselves, what is something good that's happened recently?
Something good that's happened. I had a bunch of friends come over from out of town last weekend and they stayed with me. And that was lovely. It was really nice to see them. We had a great time. We went to the Dickens Fair, which was in San Francisco, was a hassle to get to. I would not go again, but I'm glad I went.
How did you survive the Christmas music?
There wasn't a lot of Christmas music going on, actually. We did go to one like a cappella group that was singing songs, but they weren't Christmassy.
Oh, interesting.
There was a lot of songs about beer.
All right.
And wailing.
And wailing or whittling?
And wailing.
Okay.
Presumably not screaming, but yeah.
Yeah. Going to go.
Like Moby Dick, not
Yes.
and gnashing of the teeth.
Moby Dick kind of wailing.
Okay. Like, that's a weird thing to sing a song about.
Oh, I thought they were wailing instead of singing. That was my immediate. I was like, were they that bad? Wow. Okay.
No, they were actually quite good. I don't remember their name, but they were good. I would listen to them again. I wouldn't necessarily go to the Dickens Fair to see them, but I would listen to them again.
For things YouTube is for. I had a story acceptance for a market that I have tried to get into previously and have gotten rejections in, as one does. But it's an early enough acceptance, as it were, that I can't actually say where it was. So it's a story that will be published next year, I believe, and I'm very happy about it.
Fantastic.
Well, that's exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, those are great emails to get because sometimes, I'm at work, I have two monitors. One of them has my personal email up so I can obsessively track whether I've gotten a story rejection or not. And I got the email and I was like, oh, this is going to be, thank you for sending us. No, it was an acceptance.
I have a twofold good thing. I'm finally trying to clean up some of the, when you finish a bottle of lotion or whatever, you don't actually throw it away because you're like, I know there's some left in here.
And you can't just recycle it.
Right? I finally dug up 3 or 4 different bottles of skincare stuff and cut them in half because they're like tubes, right? Not bottles, I guess. And there was so much left in them. Oh my God. I've probably been using them for a week now. Just of the stuff that I've been able to scoop out with my fingers. So A, I'm cleaning up a little bit, and B, there was probably at least $40 worth of skincare that I would have thrown away if I had just dumped those bottles. So I'm glad I hoarded them.
That's amazing. That's why we hoard those things. Is we're like, one day we will find out there's actually 60% more in here.
There was oh my God. I was part of me knew it. That's why I kept them. But I was still shocked with how much product was left in those things.
It's like how with shampoo, I no longer buy pump bottle ones because the pump doesn't reach the bottom. So there's always so much. So then you're in the shower, unscrewing the top and beating it against your hand.
Yep. Oh, what are we all drinking today? This evening, whatever time it is for everyone.
It is full dark, well, about full dark here for me on the East Coast, and I am drinking the Walgreens brand French roast coffee,
Lovely.
which is called Nice, and they do it in this like diner font cursive. It's very interesting. My Jersey Devil mug.
Ooh, love it. I'm also drinking coffee, but I poured a bunch of eggnog in mine because 'tis the season.
Oh, I should have done that.
It's delightful.
Yes.
I'm participating in a tea advent calendar sip along with some friends. Today's tea is matcha green tea. It is the first tea of this calendar that has actually been good. And by that, I mean it's definitely not high quality green tea, but it's drinkable.
Oh, no. The things we put up with.
Yeah, I guess expectations are only so high for those Advent things, depending on what they are.
I mean, I was at least hoping that I would like more than one tea in 9 days.
Yeah.
But okay, yesterday's chamomile was drinkable, but I probably wouldn't make myself a second cup of it. Everything prior to that, I have poured out before I finished the first mug.
That's really bad.
Oh boy.
It's not a good I cannot recommend this calendar. It's bad.
Now, in the chamomile's defense, you're not a big herbal tea drinker.
It's true. And this is specifically an herbal tea calendar. So I'm
What?
I'm coming at it. I'm coming at it from a disadvantage. But
You were trying to broaden your horizon.
yeah, exactly. And the people that I'm drinking it with are herbal tea people, and they have also not liked the teas. So it's not just me.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Well, this is not actually a pet and tea podcast, although we should maybe consider switching to that format next year.
You should do bonus episode author pets.
Yes, we
Yes.
just talk about pets. The thing is, I think that would benefit so much from being more visual,
That's true too.
or we could just listen to the various snores and sounds that everyone's pets make.
Right.
Well, has anyone read anything good lately?
I finished reading the Sarah J. Maas Court of Thrones and Roses series, and it does suffer a little bit from bloat the last couple of books. I think book 4 should have been a novella, but they remain fun books. I enjoyed them. They got me out of my reading slump. I don't think her sex scenes are very good, but there sure are a lot of them.
It's sort of what I know about those books. I've watched much YouTube content on them. I haven't read them myself.
Yeah, I mean they're fun. Like I definitely enjoyed reading them. They're not great, but they're fun. So
I know it's overdone to compare books to food, but they really are just cotton candy, right?
they are, yeah. I was gonna say fast food more than cotton candy, but
Oh, okay.
I think it works either way.
Well, sometimes you just want chicken nuggets.
Exactly.
See, I feel well, I haven't read the books, but yeah, I don't know. I was gonna say it's an insult to chicken nuggets, but it sounded like you enjoyed them enough, so
I love chicken nuggets. So
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the comparison to chicken nuggets is not an insult to chicken nuggets.
Okay. Okay. Jen, how about you?
I read the short story Imagine Yourself Happy by Rimi Muhammad, my dear author friend in Canada.
Who will be coming on the podcast in March, I think,
Oh, hell yeah.
to talk about her new books coming out. So a little plug for us too.
He's got a bunch of books coming out. Things don't typically make me cry when I'm reading them, but definitely it's short. I think it's just 1,000. I can't remember what their limit is at that place market, but now at the end of it, I was getting all misty, and I was like, "Oh, this is really hitting me, and it's so good."
We read the
Apple
Apple
Tree
Tree
Throne.
Throne.
Yeah.
And I remember that being hitting you pretty hard for the amount of words that there are, right? She really has a strong emotion to word ratio.
Yes, very much so.
Emotional reaction in the reader, not that the story itself was like melodramatic or anything. You know what I mean?
Right? Yeah, the story aren't overwrought, but they
Yeah.
are. Yeah, they get you.
Well, we're here to talk about Exit Ghost, though. Wait, so Sarah called it your debut novel. Is that just because this is your first novel length, or is this older than I realized? I didn't do any background research that I probably should have.
No, that's fine. No. It is my debut novel. It is my first novel length thing that I've published.
Okay.
Because I did try to go TradPub first with it. I queried agents for a little more than 2 years, actually. But the problem is I started well, a problem is I started in 2020, which was not a great time to be trying to find a literary agent. Everything got slower and more awful. I just kept going because I really wanted to have a marketing team because I am not great at that necessarily. And, but then, as with all things, when it wasn't working out, I was like, well, I'm just going to do it myself.
And I'm glad you did. Well, I'm glad I got
Yeah.
to read it however it got to me.
Yeah, me too.
Well, thank you.
We asked this question for most of our guests, but genre definitions can vary quite broadly from person to person. What genre would you consider Exit Ghost and why?
I think, consider it to be fantasy because it goes from a baseline of the real world. So it's not like I'm doing secondary world fantasy with knights and dragons and all that stuff. But where I rely upon real world for the basic world building, all of the fantastical elements on it are indeed still real, even if they might be ill defined, even to the characters. So it's, I guess, modern fantasy. I mean, some people have called it gothic, got sort of horror-ish elements to it, but I'm also not really a horror writer. And anytime I think, hey, is this horror? I'm like, I don't really think it's horror enough. So it is a very, I think, genre blurry sort of place.
Before we started recording, I had an entire rambly thing about why I don't think it counts as gothic, but anyone who likes gothic lit would love this book. So it's like there's enough overlap that I think it's worth bringing up, but I don't think it ticks enough boxes to actually count itself.
Yeah, that's fair because, like, it does have place as character and it is somewhat oppressive in that place, depending on which place it is. And, but it's, yeah, I think it's just kind of standing at where's that intersection, like 4 points where 4 United States meet each other. It's
The
like
Four
just
Corners.
standing there in the middle where, yeah, there you go.
But I did just skip to the who should read this book question, and I took it away from Sarah, but
Yeah, I was going
you
to say,
brought it up. I couldn't
we'll
help
get to there.
myself.
We'll get to there.
Slow down.
What was that delightful description, Sarah, that you used to lure me into reading this book?
Witchy-girl Hamlet, which I stole shamelessly from Jen.
Yeah. That's very good and accurate.
Yeah, that's because I'm not great at pitching. I'm not great at blurbing, but that was the driving thesis of the novel that it's modern witchy girl Hamlet at the Jersey Shore. Yeah,
So Hamlet, huh?
yeah. Well, because the other thing, like within, because you asked about genres, I guess as a writer, I have personal categories where, like, I've got my run with the haunted novellas, and they're fun and breezy and dryly sarcastic a lot of the time.
Delightful, and I love them.
Yes, yeah, no, those things. Well, I don't like to say that about myself. I just like to hear other people say it.
I'll say it for you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. But with Exit Ghost and some of my short stories, I've got a category where it's my dad died and I'm sad about it. And Hamlet is that Shakespeare, Hamlet's dad died prior to the start of the play, and he's really sad about it. And because how can you not be? Well, depending on one's relationship with one's dad. But, Hamlet seemed to get along okay with Hamlet Sr. So.
There was such an interesting aspect of this story because, it opens with Jules waking up. Is it 6 months later? Is that the amount of time that passes?
Yeah, yeah, like, because I don't even say months necessarily in my it sort of takes place before Labor Day weekend.
Oh, fair enough. In my head, that's how it got defined.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that is about right, yeah.
And so she is going through all of this fresh grief and processing it, but everyone around her has kind of seems to have moved on, and that leaves her in such an uncomfortable place. It set the tone, though, because it isolates her so much more from the people around her than she already was.
And that's I find that is a thing that can happen with grief, that especially if because everybody grieves in their own way, and even if the people around them have lost the same person and also love that same person, there's kind of these circles where it's like, okay, well, Jules and her mother were the closest to Jules' dad. And in theory, they would be reckoning with similar devastations. But again, Jules sort of had that deferred. So she's like hoping that her distant mother would connect with her in some way, maybe. But for her mother, she's, cold, busy businesswoman. And Jules is like, well, I'm just kind of an open wound. And it doesn't, those experiences don't always match. And then you've got people who are sometimes like, well, why aren't you over it already? There's been time, but doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that, and even for her, there hasn't been as much time as for everyone else.
Exactly. Like both calendar wise and like in her experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. For her, it just happened, you know?
So it is, of course, witchy-girl Hamlet. Just can't forget the witchcraft.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the book, you have a note talking a little bit about how, like, "This witchcraft isn't real. Please don't
Yes.
go try to do this," etcetera, etcetera. So how did you sort of put together the version of witchcraft that we see on the page?
It largely vibes. I have other short stories that would be considered like in the same world where, there's a main character who isn't even necessarily defined as a witch on the page, but you understand, oh, this person knows some kind of magical thing. And it's always I think in my head, because again, because I described my fantasy or the fantastical element in Exit Ghost as poorly defined, and it's kind of on purpose because the more you try to nail something down, the less mysterious it becomes or evocative necessarily, or the more poorly you're actually defining it. And so I sort of thought that from a like real modern world perspective, magic isn't, something that everybody knows about. It's not something that you're going to walk into a school and learn as you might in a secondary fantasy world novel. But there might be, groups of people who have learned it in some way with great difficulty. And this game of telephone across the ages of people who have figured out, scrabbly ways of doing magic and passing it on to people that they felt close enough to, or they realized, hey, if more of us are doing something, it gets more powerful and that kind of thing. And then I grew up Catholic and like the ritual of mass and all of the different rites and everything are always very well ritualized. So that is where a lot of why I lean into like Catholic imagery so much because there's always like, well, there's a saint for that, there's an icon for that, there's symbology, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I really enjoyed the witchcraft in this book. Like it's like you say, it's a little nebulous, but there's enough there that I have questions and want to learn more, which is how I want to feel about a magic system. So I think that worked really well. Something else that you do is you include text messages between the characters. And I wanted to ask about how you decided to format that, given that I think so many novels sometimes just tend to kind of like hand wave that stuff away because it is easier just to not acknowledge it.
It's easier not to describe a character like
Yeah.
Yeah.
in a way, some of that came from my role playing experience and background, where years back, a friend of ours was running the cyberpunk game Shadowrun. And in that, sometimes we were doing, like via Google Hangouts or whatever, we were having chats away from the table, and sometimes characters would be texting or whatever. And in doing that, I wanted, like, because using quotes didn't work because that's like what you're saying with your human mouth. And using asterisks didn't work because it just bolded the text like in the messaging system. So I was like, slashes, that works. And that's what I've just adopted across the board because, like, that's how people text to Run with the Hunted too. It's just with flashes. But I think that texting is, and that kind of messaging is so much of how people communicate now. Like, you don't necessarily call somebody on the phone because that means something bad has happened, or you don't call somebody without saying, "Hey, I'm going to call you." So just texts make a lot of sense to integrate into fiction.
I always make fun of the horror movies that just pretend cell phones don't exist because otherwise it would be hard to write the plot.
It's a terrible problem where you're like, "Oh, well, I could just, call the police or
Yeah.
whatever." Uh-huh. So, yeah, yeah, so you either have to, address cell phones head on or hand wave them so that, "Oh, you're out of service," or whatever.
Right.
Or your phone has exploded, although I did actually like that.
I was gonna say, "Wait a minute, I did do a thing where I removed somebody's phone."
It made sense though, it fit.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like you were trying to get out of a loophole or a plot hole.
Yeah, it actually does make a lot of sense in the context of the story.
I think the first time I saw texting in a book was one of those it was years ago, one of those YA novels where they put, like, the actual pictures of the bubbles in the paragraph.
Yeah, and there's a whole series that's called, like, TTYL and stuff like that, and I think that a book that does it. There.
That might be what I'm thinking of. I don't recall. It's been a little while. I think we've run through most of the stuff we can talk about without spoiling the book horribly. Although, actually,
I mean, it is Hamlet.
yeah, that's actually a good point, though. There was an interesting experience I had while reading this where part of me was like, well, I know how Hamlet ends.
That's true.
But this book was far enough removed that I didn't feel like necessarily knew what was going to happen next. So I did definitely still like feel tension. Like, oh no.
Yeah, that is true because I didn't make a one-for-one Hamlet adaptation, just like how the cat what are you growling at?
She does not like the idea of a one-to-one Hamlet adaptation.
Right? Yeah, yeah, Yorick would, not be a character if that was the case. Because that's the other thing, the characters aren't one for one, the story isn't. Because I I don't wanna say I don't see the value in it, but it wasn't interesting to me to approach it like that.
So, how did you decide which aspects of Hamlet you wanted to incorporate into the story? Like, how did you pick and choose that?
Well, you ask that as though I plan my writing, which I don't.
Well, I guess we can cross that question off of our question list
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah, I start at the start and I end at the end. So there are times where even as I'm approaching what is a major story beat in Hamlet, and I'm like, am I going to do it exactly like that? Am I going to disregard it completely? And really, I decide as I'm writing it. Like there are definitely things because the way I wrote Exit Ghost, or the way this particular like draft that then became the book happened, is I took two different projects and kind of shuffled them together like a deck of cards. And one of them was a Hamlet rewrite with no magical elements. And the other was a story about two friends who were witches in Asbury Park in 1979. And I made different decisions from those drafts as I integrated them because I was like, I think that might be predictable and I like this other way better, that kind of thing. So sometimes the writing is in the rewriting, as they say.
Well, Sarah, who should read this book?
Well, you already answered this question. This book isn't a Gothic novel, but if you like Gothic novels, you will like this book. If you enjoy retellings and like Shakespeare and Hamlet, you will like this book. If you want a witchy atmospheric novel where the witchcraft is not really highly defined, but definitely there, you'll like this book.
To avoid spoilers, skip to 4140.
Okay, so I think that I was screaming about this in DMs to you, but Jenner, he is such a creep. I have so many questions about him. Not necessarily like specific questions per se, but like
Right.
nebulous, like what is going on with him? Like, are we going to see more of him? Are there? I think you mentioned there was going to be an Una book at one point. Fingers crossed.
My specific questions about Jenner are what the fuck and how dare he?
Yes.
Well, those are broad but also specific.
Yeah.
I do have an Una book that is partially drafted. I want to say, I did a NaNoWriMo draft that's like 65,000 words or something, but hasn't reached the end of the book yet. And also in the course of writing that, I now kind of know like, oh, this is what Jenner's deal was. Because I sometimes do things that I don't necessarily know the answer either, but because my point of view character doesn't know, it doesn't matter. Um, because I really love leaning into point of view and what those characters do or don't know and what experiences they bring to things and that kind of deal. So obviously he's a certain kind of guy.
He's a douche.
Yeah, yes, yeah. But also like he's always in my head kind of been that like very slightly out of place, takes himself too seriously in a way that the people around him don't necessarily understand kind of way because he doesn't necessarily tell them either why he wants what he wants or what it is that he wants. He just takes advantage of people in the way that he sees fit and then blows out of town.
That is definitely what he does, and exit goes.
Yeah. And in some ways, again, because I didn't do Hamlet one for one, but in some ways, Jenner sort of fills the rat trap portion of the play. Because I named him Jenner from Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, because names are hard. And I was like, that's a name from something to do with rats. But he didn't have anything to do with the death of Jules' dad or anything like that. So it's just, one of those parts of a remix, because sometimes people call like a modern or different take on classic literature a remix. And I don't really know what that necessarily means when it's implemented. Like I've seen it done and I'm like, I get what they mean, but I also don't know the parameters of its use, I guess. Like somebody released a Little Women remix, and that's what it even says on the cover. And I'm like, what does that mean? What are you doing? I'm interested.
Publishing jargon. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe if I had an agent, I would know.
Well, we meet Jenner as he eventually is introduced as Una's not quite boyfriend. And I had a terrible experience reading this book
Oh, no.
because I, like an idiot, it's all my fault. Like an idiot, I was reading it between meetings. So I had to just like put it down when the next meeting came. And I had to put the book down as Una and Jules fell into the ocean.
Oh, no.
So I had that moment of, oh, fuck, that's right. Una is Ophelia. Oh, shit. Oh, fuck. And that was a perfect example of, like, I was like, well, Ophelia dies. I
Yeah.
honestly don't know if Una is going to die in this moment or not. Like, it could genuinely go either way. And then I had to wait a day.
Oh, a whole day. Oh, no. And I'll tell you, when I was writing that particular passage in the actual, this is Exit Ghost, not the other projects that didn't come to pass, I didn't know either. Because right when they fell into the ocean is right when my writing group ended for the day.
Ah.
And I had to pack up my laptop and help close the library and then do that transitionary, go home, walk the dog, do we have dinner sort of thing. And then I sat down again. I'm like, what am I going to do here? Because in the other books, in the rough drafts, she dies. In the other books, that character is Una in the non-magical book, and she's actually in the magical book, and she dies. But the draft of the magical book didn't get much further past that, and I was like, I kind of took that as I think I made the wrong choice when standing at the crossroads here. And so I was like, well, what if she does live? And that was the way.
Well, I'm glad she lived. She didn't deserve to die after everything she'd been through.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, exactly. Like justice for Ophelia.
Yeah.
Especially like when you're reading or watching Hamlet and you learn about her death, it's as though whoever was supposed to be watching her, in fact, was watching her and just did not intercede. They're like, oh, well, she fell in the water and sank off till she drowned. It's like, how do you know that, bud?
Yeah.
Why didn't she get her out of the water? What do you mean? Why did you do that?
Yeah. I will say I did want to shake Jules a little bit because at the beginning it's introduced as Una will move in with Ashley Adai, which will be great because then we can keep an eye on her. And then never does she actually keep an eye on her.
Which, as I just said.
Yeah.
Like, I get it because, Jules is very deeply traumatized. She makes a series of bad decisions because of that trauma. It's understandable that things fall by the wayside, but I agree. I was like, Jules, get it together.
Right, because Ashley has a job and Una's supposed to be going to college and she's a good girl. So why wouldn't she not be going to college? Or why would she not be going?
I think that's the tragedy of this particular book, though, because I totally understand why Jules had too much on her plate to also take on taking care of Una. And I totally get why Ashley didn't take Jules seriously about how dangerous Jenner was. It's like, it's so understandable. But as the reader on the outside, I just wanted to go, what are you doing? Just give him a little shake.
Yeah, and it's not because Ashley doesn't completely disregard her because at the beginning because Ashley's like, I'm taking that one home. And Jules is like, can you throw that one back? And she just drops it with no question.
Mm-hmm.
But also they didn't really present a united front and be like, actually this guy's bad and we never want to see him again until, the point at which they were like, this cannot happen anymore. And then, by that point, Jenner kind of transitions away anyway.
Yeah. I know I really appreciated the not quite subtextual, but unwritten girl code that we see in this book. Right? With the when Jules says, "This guy, he just has bad vibes," and Ashley says, "Okay."
Yeah, yeah.
And then there was another point early on, before he really has Una, like, wrapped around his finger. Jules says something about, like, "Oh, I'm tired, I'm gonna go home," knowing that both Una and Ashley would immediately leave the party. It would be their idea,
Right, yeah.
but they would leave the party to make sure she got home safe.
Yeah, they're like, "Well, we're not just letting you walk home alone, so,
Yeah.
okay, bye."
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that, I mean, even as I was frustrated with Jules and Ashley for not doing enough to protect Una, they also, like, by the end of the book, they recognize that. So it's not unaddressed,
Yeah.
in the book by the characters. So I'm like, okay, I get it.
And part of it felt like them just acknowledging Una's agency, right?
Yeah.
They're not her parents. They can't just say, "You may not see this guy." And so that puts them in a weird position.
Yeah. You're allowed to make your own bad choices.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because like, her dad absolutely would have been like, "No, you're absolutely not dating. What do you mean? You're going to college, you're having your classes." And then, her big brother would have been like, "No, absolutely you're not seeing this guy." And it's like, "Oh, that's not anybody's decision to make but hers,
Right.
even if it's a bad one."
Mhm. And so they definitely, like, they try to be a buffer more than the voice of authority, and I appreciated that. I just wanted to shake them, that's all. Just a li
Yeah, who hasn't been the doofy person in their early 20s who's like, "I don't know if that relationship is right, but."
Well, that was part of what made Jenner such a great character is because, like, everyone has met him. Everyone knows that 30-year-old who hangs out with 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
Or new.
Yeah, who
Yeah.
and who has that particular like, "Oh, well, I know this thing." And it's like, "Well, actually, I know it too."
Mhm. Yeah, there's that smug douchiness, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a dumb joke, but I'm gonna make it anyway.
Do it.
Chekhov would be pretty mad at this book.
Right?
Yeah.
That's why I have to write the sequel.
Yeah. Because you introduced the very cool vintage gun, never fired once.
It's true, it's true, and I knew and again, that's one of those things where I'm not necessarily always aware of reader expectation as I'm writing something because again, have the story take me away. I knew absolutely that putting a gun in Jules's hands either meant she was gonna use it on somebody or herself, if a reader was expecting it in a very Hamlet sort of way, and I was like, that's just not gonna happen. I found a different way.
Yeah, you don't totally leave us hanging because it is used as a focus in a magical ritual,
Yes.
which I think fits with the book so much better, right? Because it's not just like a cut and dry murder story. There's magic.
Right? Not just and then I fucking shot him.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's magic instead.
It would almost be weird if after all of this magic and, like, uncertainty and stuff, it was just resolved with
Like the Indiana Jones sword fight scene, where he
Mhm.
just watches the guy flourish for a while and shoots him instead.
Mhm. As we were talking about that, I was like and I loved how after all of that, the big magical ritual that they were very worried about backfiring worked great. It did exactly what she wanted and had basically no collateral damage. And there Sarah reminded me that, no, Marianne did die.
Yeah. So it has some collateral damage. Not a lot, maybe, but
Nah, she should have been there.
Yeah, Marianne died and the estate was lost,
yeah,
but all the dogs were fine.
which is the important thing.
I loved that you clarified that, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so important to me because really, like, so often in a dark fantasy or a horror narrative, the only reason there is for a dog to be there is for it to die. And I'm not going to do that. I'm just not doing it.
It's cheap horror. It's like, yeah, it's gonna make me sad. It doesn't mean the writer did anything cool or interesting.
Exactly. Like, it doesn't help. It just stabs you.
Mhm.
It doesn't help the narrative.
I appreciate how clear you've been in all of your talking about this book on social media. Yorick is okay. The dog is fine.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not going to get invested in this, Shakespearean tragedy where everybody dies. Yorick is alive in this one and he's alive at the end.
Yorick is the best boy.
Sometimes he's the one who has it together in the room. The problem is he's a dog. So,
So, Sarah, I have a question for you. I guess you've read this twice now. Thinking back to when you read it for the first time, were you sure that Hector really did do it?
No. I was not sure.
Right? I was like, could that be the twist? It wasn't, and it worked out, but I was very, like, especially because so much of this book is around Jules kind of dissociating from the people around her. I was like, is she going to do something terrible because she's been misled? Talk about tension.
Thank you. And it's kind of bad because I've said to some people that my sense of tension in my own work is a little broken. Like sometimes I'll be writing it and I do mean for there to be tension and escalating tension. And I'm like, I don't really know if this works actually. And then I'll like send it to my first reader and she'll be like, Jen, this is the point where I stopped breathing and this is where I started breathing again. And I'm like, oh, good, it did work.
Yeah, but I really enjoyed that ambiguity of not being sure whether or not she was getting the correct information or whether she could believe the information she was getting. And I think that holds up on a reread as well. Like it's not something that only works on the first read.
Because sometimes you read or watch something and you're dragged along with it. And then you get to the end and then you start thinking about it and you're like, wait, that doesn't work.
Or the, "Why didn't they just call them?"
Yeah, exactly.
So often ruins everything.
Everybody has phones. Yeah.
Mhm.
Unless yours blew up.
Unless your dad's ghost blows up your phone.
So we have talked a little bit about how, for example, like Una died in previous drafts and doesn't die in the final version, obviously. Are there any other like major changes? Like how different is the final product from the first drafts? I guess plural because you said you mashed up two things.
Right. Yeah. In this case, yeah, I mashed up a couple of things. So in the original untitled, like I literally just called it Asbury Park 1979 because often title comes after the thing is done. It wasn't Juliet's dad who died. It was like her boyfriend. And as I was, writing the serious draft, as it were, I felt like that, didn't resonate. And because I was combining it with a draft of what had been Hamlet, I was like, well, of course it's her dad. That's the thing. And I didn't have dogs at all in any of the other drafts. And in the very first draft of Exit Coast, Yorick was a Mastiff, not a Doberman, because Mastiffs are kind of, if you're looking for an estate guardian breed, it's something like that, I think was more, in theory, more typically used in our, sense of whatever medieval Europe was, because Dobermans are more people-y dogs than, turn loose on a property dogs, despite the movies with the junkyard dogs thing. But because Dobermans are the dogs I've had as the drafts progressed, even though there was a point at which I was like, wow, it would be really funny if he was a great thing. But I was like, the dogs that I know, the mannerisms, the breed traits, they're Dobermans. So of course it's going to be that. And I think that's pretty much it. Once I was writing what became one that I published, I didn't change a whole lot in between anything other than the dog breed.
Were there any scenes that surprised you as you were writing?
The way I resolved, because in the previous drafts, Una died, or, the Ophelia character died. So when I decided, actually, no, I'm not going to kill her, the way that I resolved that a little bit, that kind of did. And also, when I was writing, like, I don't know if the final ritual is correct necessarily, but when Jules goes back to the estate and after the whole, fell into the ocean thing, and she is doing the ritual to call her dad again. Like, again, as I was writing it, that is the point at which I was like, actually, he doesn't answer that time. And then she's just so devastated. She's like, you know what? I'm going to just solve this once and for all, even if it kills me. And I'm going to do it again,
Bad decision making, but understandable.
Well, yeah. Like there's a point, because she is a very prickly character and kind of abrasive and isn't necessarily acting in what seemed like her best interests. It's established very early on that she, got sent home with a bunch of meds because she was in the hospital after having gotten shot in the head. And I assume there's a lot of medication to do with that. And she's like, I'm just not, I feel so disconnected from everything. I'm just going to stop with that, except the painkillers. Because in some ways, a great thing about fiction is you can write characters behaving in a way that you would absolutely never. Like, I have never personally self-harmed. I can understand intellectually and character-wise why you would. And Jules does. And in some ways, it is just a symptom of what has happened to her. And then in other ways, she can use it for magical gains.
What would you like readers to take away from this book?
God, I don't do what Jules does.
Justice for Ophelia.
Yeah, justice for Ophelia. Don't do what Jules does. Ashley is the best friend you could ever ask for.
It's funny. I saw the estate being effectively swallowed up by the ocean as a good thing for everybody, but maybe that's just me being crazy.
I mean, if they had a nice library, that's tragic. I don't know if they had a nice library, but
Presumably they did. Jules doesn't visit it in the course of the novel. But in a way, because one of my favorite books is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. So in a way, the estate being swallowed by the ocean is my Manderley burning. Spoilers. Okay.
Now we spoiled Hamlet too. Oh well.
Yeah, just everything's ruined. Oh, that's the other thing. I didn't kill Jules's mother. So sometimes in my marketing tweeting, we'll call it, I've said that it has a lower body count than Hamlet, but also a higher body count than Hamlet, if you know what I mean.
And I mean, Jules doesn't die either.
Yeah. Yes, that is true. Yeah, so lots of people are alive.
Yeah. No one is safe, but also some of them are, surprisingly.
Yeah. I mean, bodily. Well, I don't want to say bodily even. They live.
Yeah.
They live through it. That's the safety.
Mm-hmm. I have a very dumb Words Are Weird.
please tell us about your Words Are Weird, Lily.
So words, words and how weird they are sometimes. I had an absolute brain fart while I was reading this book because I was reading the ebook, and there's a physical version, right?
Yes. Yeah, there's a hardcover.
I just ordered it too late for it to get to me in time, so I read the ebook.
Yeah. Ebook and hardcover.
And at one point, a very wonderful metaphor, the machine made a noise like a dial-up modem. It's very, very good. Unfortunately, my phone had a line break halfway through the word dial-up, and I just could not comprehend that DI-ALUP was the word
no.
dial-up. I was like, D-ALUP? What's an ALUP? What is going on? It took me an embarrassingly long time to figure that out.
Oh no. It's just what our brains do with words sometimes, though. You counter it slightly differently and it's just gone. You're like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, just the concept of hyphenating words across lines for some reason just flew out of my mind.
Because it doesn't make sense.
It was like hieroglyphics. I was like, what?
Also, I feel like a lot of times when words are hyphenated because of a line break, it's in a place that makes more sense to the two words. I mean, maybe that wouldn't have helped much in this particular case, but I don't know. I feel like if it had been after the L, it would have been more comprehensible.
Right, I would have seen the word dial and gone, oh yeah.
Because it would have been actually two words instead of just the computer formatting it going, well, that's how many characters we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and that was just I'm just telling on myself.
It happens to everybody,
Yeah.
though.
It's just so how a very common word, but you slightly change the context and suddenly it's just I don't know, completely different language.
Yeah. Or that thing where you see a word too much and then you're questioning what that word is, if you actually know it, if it's something else.
Yeah. Semantic satiation. I looked that up once, and now that is stuck in my head forever, which is useful.
It is.
But the word dial-up fleeing my head when I needed it most was not useful.
Well, and that's also one of those, as time goes on, is less and less familiar to people.
That's true. But it's such a perfect sensory memory. Who can't hear that in their head immediately the second you say it? I guess, like you said, younger folk, but
Yeah.
for anyone who has ever heard it.
It was always so loud, and it was coming from the computer itself.
And grating. They weren't.
Yes.
It's not a pretty sound.
No, not in any way.
Jen, thank you so much for coming on. Before we let you go, can you tell us a little bit about any current projects? I know you have your werewolf book coming out in March, which is very good. We've read it. I've read it.
Yeah, so that's like the big publishing thing that I'm doing next year, or self-publishing thing. I'm doing what we in the business call a rapid release of my werewolf trilogy. And I guess kind of by default, the trilogy itself is called Learn to Howl because the first book is called Learn to Howl, and I didn't think of another like separate, bigger name. So that's just what it is. And yeah, that's coming out, I believe the first Tuesday in March is the 5th, and that's when I'm publishing it. And there will be pre-orders when I have cover art, which is soon. I have a very talented artist cousin who's doing those for me. And also actually, Run with the Haunted 7 is also coming next year on its normal day of October 31st. And I don't have a super pitch for the werewolf books because I'm bad at pitching. That's one reason I queried Exit Ghost because I hadn't.
Yeah.
Like, get an agent. Then they'll help me with pitching. No.
Well, your werewolf book is a lot of fun. It's not super, super traditional werewolf, and it's Lily and I were just discussing it a while ago. I don't remember when.
Long enough ago that I don't remember a lot of the conversation.
Yeah.
We.
We had a phrase for what it was, and I wish that I could remember that. But it's very much like an action novel that just happens to have werewolves as the main characters. So it's a lot of fun. I would definitely, once pre-orders are up, I would definitely recommend listeners to go pre-order it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And where can our listeners find that information?
Well, it will be on my website, which is one of the most terrible words to, try to say online for people to understand, but it's authorizedmusings.blogspot.com. And then similarly on Twitter, because in 2012 or whatever, when I was doing this, 2015, having a kitschy little handle and having your branding be uniform was important. So my Twitter and then also my Blue Sky is authorized musing.
Your Blue Sky has the G though, right?
Oh, I believe it does. Yeah. Yeah. Blue Sky gave you more characters. So I think it is actually authorized musings dot Blue Sky social, however
Whatever that long
those
URL is. Yeah.
things
We'll link to
work.
those.
Yeah. Thank you.
But I like to ask you to say it out loud just to watch authors panic.
I could just spell it with the native phonetic alphabet, which nobody but me ever understands when I'm on the phone. No, A is for apple. No, alpha.
Well, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This has been so much fun. I'm glad to finally have a conversation with you.
Yes.
And we'll probably be talking soon.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find our show notes and a lot of other nonsense.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated.
Bye.